Hello, welcome to Holistically Speaking. My name is Morella DeVoe. I am your host. Our mission at Holistically Speaking is to be the avenue through which the voices of holistic health and holistic living reach you at the times you need it most. And today I'm joined by Patrick McManaway.
Good morning.
Welcome. We have had Patrick on our show several times. You've talked about geomancy and you've talked about working with energies in agriculture. There are a lot of different things that you do, and I was fascinated reading through your website. You are a geomance, is that the proper word, geomancer?
The practitioner of geomancy or geobiology.
And yes. You do, I've heard people talk about you as an earth acupuncturist, and you do personal consultations and energy consultations. What else do? You wear so many hats.
Well, obviously, when one's working with subtle energies in a holistic fashion, it touches every part of our life. So depending what people's concerns or where benefit might be most directly applied, either in their home or their office or their landscape or their personal lives.
So, and precisely the different environments in which you work, home, office, personal life, professional life, I guess it's part of what we're going to be touching on today. We're going to be talking about psychic energies.
Yes, I wanted to take the opportunity to discuss psychic energies in an environment because of the capacity of this as an informational channel for people. And I work a great deal with people who have an experience of their atmosphere, either in their home generally or in one or two rooms, as being disturbing to them, often in quite a profound way. And what I have discovered is that it's a very common experience for people to experience perhaps a ghost or an uncomfortable place memory pattern in their homes. Perhaps they avoid the room, perhaps they don't feel comfortable when they're there, and it can compromise their ability to hold space for their family or to interact in an open and intimate way. Sometimes animals don't like going into a psychically disturbed space. But especially what I find is that because people often aren't comfortable in sharing the experience with their friends or with other people, they have it as a very isolated and disorienting experience. And at least half of my clients who are affected by a psychic disturbance in this way, what they really want, even more than the problem to be resolved, is to be reassured that they're not simply going mad.
Right.
Because although paranormal or psychic phenomena are very common and are often experienced, we don't have a completely easy relationship with that element of life, as it were, or afterlife in our cultural contemporary paradigm. And so people either feel that there's something wrong with them or that they've done something wrong in order to create an atmosphere or to be living within an atmosphere. So especially I find it's enough already that the place feels uncomfortable, but then people feeling isolated about that is especially difficult. And so I'm really glad we've got an opportunity to talk about that and bring it into the open for people.
Yeah, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation because I find myself quite a bit at a loss or in ignorance about this. So I would like to start by asking you, what are psychic energies? When you talk about the psychic energies in our environment, what specifically are we, if the word specific even applies to it, but what are psychic energies?
Well, I think it's a fairly broad term probably for a number of different things if we were to look at it in a scientific fashion. Certainly as far as the human experience goes, they are energies or energy patterns that we perceive, sometimes intuitively, sometimes instinctively, sometimes very physically as a sensation in our body. Suddenly it was chilly and the hairs went up on the back of my neck. People have those very physiological reactions often. But the energies are of a nature clearly that are outside of the direct reach of our 5 tangible senses. So although there's often or sometimes at least a smell that goes with a psychic pattern, there's more often not a smell, although sometimes there's a temperature shift there isn't always. Sometimes it's sensation. Sometimes we do catch glimpses of things just at the edge of the range of our vision, but not always. And so they're a little enigmatic. To be aware of them, there must be generally some part of our sensory mechanism that is picking up that there's something there. But we give the general term psychic energies to them because while they have pattern and form and intelligence, we can't generally interact with them in a purely physical sense. So they're of the mind and spirit themselves rather than clearly of a body.
Right. So obviously not tangible, anything that...
They're not tangible in terms of the touch, but as said, there is often a physical sensation. There's the awareness.
Some sort of awareness.
Of somebody else there, if it's the spirit of a person or of being watched. As I say, often there's a temperature shift. Our physical body supports our spirit and mind. In the absence of a physical body, that same spirit and mind needs to draw energy from its environment. And so often in doing that, it'll take 1 or 2 degrees of Fahrenheit out of the environment, sometimes enough to trip a thermostat into switching on a...
Oh my goodness.
That can be a curious way the ghost came in and the heater switched on. I've seen that a few times.
So, for many people, as you were saying at the beginning, for many people it may start with a significant discomfort in a particular room, in a particular space that they come to you. So what are some of the things that you have found?
Yes. So at least at first experience, one generally simply has a sense of discomfort and maybe the place feeling it's a bit spooky. What's useful in terms of working to clear and resolve and free the spirit and balance the energy and make a place really bright and friendly and happy to be in, it can be useful to identify in the mix of the feel what the different elements are. And so one thing is whether or not there's the presence of what we would call an earthbound spirit, somebody like us who's still for some reason in their mind relating to physical circumstance rather than having made a full separation into the heaven realm and free in that regard. So sometimes there are human ghosts or so-called earthbound spirits. Sometimes a place is very heavily patterned by the memories of what's happened there before. And that is an infinitely sliding scale from places that have just been warm family homes, that have hosted a lot of parties and just feel great to be in, and the sort of rich pattern of people have lived and been happy here. By contrast to places that have hosted murder or suicide or rape or have been built proximate or on a battlefield site or perhaps on previous grave sites. And so sometimes the atmosphere of place still carries unresolved tensions and traumas that we can pick up on and feel. And sometimes they're vague echoes, but sometimes they feel like they're still very present patterns that touch and influence our emotions and change our mood in that way. So human spirits, place memories, some part of the experience of a place is also how we feel about the more fundamental parts of the spirit of place, which would include the elemental consciousness just of the rock beneath our feet. And not uncommonly in construction processes, there's a post-construction shock state that's held by the landscape, a little bit that would be similar if we were to break an arm.
Right.
It's not a rational shock, we can see what's happened, but there's a change in pattern, and that pattern has its own simple intelligence, but the bone has grown that way and the bone will regrow that way. And in the same way, sometimes those very patterning mineral consciousness of landscape can be disturbed with new construction. So from a human mind down to the mind of a gnome and everything in between, different intelligences or patternings of the unseen environment can make a very powerful experience for us.
And what I'm getting, the impression I'm getting as I'm hearing you speak, is that if we think of everything being energy and everything being a certain vibration, that any vibration that has taken place in a particular space has the potentiality to impact everything to a smaller or bigger degree. And so things that have a very strong vibration, say a battlefield or a very traumatic event, has the potential to impact the vibration of that space for a long time. You know, like everything's still reverberating at that vibration. Is that
yes.
a way of thinking?
Absolutely, and I think we can think in holistic terms that the energy system of a person is actually very similar to the energy system of a planet. Clearly, it's very dramatically different in scale, but we have a toroidal field, so does an atom, so does a planet, so does a galaxy, so does a solar system. So although the scale is different and perhaps the layering and the points of most greatly defined consciousness are slightly different, we can make fairly direct analogy between our energies and the energies in place. Certainly in feng shui terms, there would be no difference between qi in a person, qi in a landscape, qi in a plant, qi in an elemental consciousness. So the feeling layer of landscape we can think of kind of like our own muscle tone. And after we've had a shock, we'll tend to hold that memory in tight muscle tone until such time as we relax and the muscle tone softens and we get to expand, and then the memory can go free and is no longer held as a burden by the place. Traumatic place memories, the muscle has got tight, but it hasn't been it hasn't been allowed to let that go, and so the trauma is still held just exactly as though we were holding it in muscle tone.
So you were saying some of these psychic energies that might be held in place could be the earthbound spirit who hasn't quite let go, even though the body has passed. The memory, the place memory of the events, the elemental energies of water, earth, whatever impact has happened there. Were there others that I didn't mean to cut you off?
Well,
when you were going?
once you get into detail, of course, there's a longer and longer list. But those are the main sort of big rocks to get oriented to, and they're all equally important. Very often, at least for us as people, the most significant thing will be whether or not there's another human mind in the space. And so we often look to identify and support releasing any earthbound spirits as a first thing, because they're so proactive. They have as much will and consciousness as we're familiar with, and so if they're distressed, different categories of how we can become earthbound. Sometimes we become earthbound because we're confused or disoriented. Perhaps we don't know that we've died, or perhaps we know that we've died, but we don't know what to do next about being dead. Sometimes people are very strongly agendaed and they're still trying to complete a task or a process, or
they're still attached to their story, perhaps.
They're still attached to their story, the business they were building, or the grandchildren that they're so engaged with. And then sometimes ghosts are very frightened because they perhaps feel ashamed or guilty of some circumstance or some activity or event in their life, and they may believe that there is going to be some kind of unpleasant punishment awaiting them as a recompense for that. And so those folk are often the hardest ones to help, and the ones needing the most amount of gentleness and compassion in approach too. But generically, Mirella, we're familiar with two parts of our own mind. The circumstantial, detail-oriented mind that's responsible for setting the alarm clock and getting to work on time and putting food on the table and making sure we're wearing clothes. And that is, in esoteric terms, that would be considered part of the incarnational vehicle. The ego structure is really responsible for giving us an appropriate social personality so that we're effective as human beings in our culture.
Yeah.
And then the higher part of our mind, the so-called qualitative mind, where we appreciate perhaps truth and beauty and love and art and music and so on, that part would be considered to be part of our eternal soul, part of the consciousness of ourselves that lives forever in between lives. And in that aesthetic or qualitative mind, we tend to have an outwards awareness, and it's very easy to connect with the angelic realms, with the ancestor spirits of our own, friends and family gone before. But when we're in our structured, quantitative mind, by nature, we tend to look more inwards because we're having to manage resources and figure out our budget. So literally, at the point where we die, it makes all the difference whether we're inward-looking or outward-looking, because if we're inward-looking and caught on one of those careworn hamster wheels that our minds get locked into, of worries or concerns, then if when we die our mind is stuck down here, the helpers, the angels, the friends and family awaiting us in spirit, they can't reach into that part of our mind.
Right.
And so that's how we can kind of get stuck. And help is waiting, but what's needed often is just a present human witness, because I can witness your concerns, but also relate to your higher spirit, and you can do the same for me. So if we're in a body, we can pattern interrupt because we get to have a cup of tea, or we go to sleep, or there's the next meal, or circumstances change and we come back to ourselves. But the ghost finds themselves in a kind of timeless state, and so they can stay in that loop of confusion, disorientation.
It's like in one particular thought over and over and over in that same thought.
And we see children playing like that, and they become very absorbed in activity, and they do it over and over and again in order to fully engage and explore with the experience.
So if someone, I'm thinking back at the beginning of our conversation where you said that people come to you because they feel very uncomfortable. They have this awareness that something's up in a particular room. I'm thinking that many people who are watching this and maybe thinking, yes, that's me, that maybe they're finding some reassurance in our conversation saying, I'm not crazy. This might actually be taking place.
Yes.
So what can they do about it?
Yes. The most important thing to know is that it's a normal experience, and people shouldn't be disturbed in any way about having the experience, even if the experience itself is disturbing to them. Sometimes people will talk to the ghosts that are present in their house. There's a distinction in terms of how we work with ghosts. One strategy is simply to ask them to leave so that we're comfortable, because they're not there anymore. And often they will respond to that. Those of us who practice in this area feel that we have a duty of care to the earthbound spirits, and that it might easily be one of us, and we don't want to get left behind waiting for the bus, as it were. And so we would typically engage specifically with the spirit, and through very loving healing approaches, sometimes through connecting telepathically with the mind of the ghost to give them reassurance. But ultimately we want to connect them to an absolutely trusted and compassionate source of guidance that will take them into their afterlife, to reunite with friends and family who have gone before. So a very careful process of making sure that actually the ghost gets their needs met, because if they're free and clear and happy, once they're free and clear, they can always come back if there's need as a free spirit. And quite a different category of psychic experiences where we perhaps in dream or subliminal state, perhaps in meditation, sometimes in waking day, have the experience of a friend or ancestral spirit who's free and clear coming back to reassure us or give us wisdom or guidance at a transitional point of our life. So we're not sending them away forever, we're facilitating them completing the process of their death and being in a free place with that. So sometimes people at home can do that for themselves, if they're able to hold a compassionate space and just give the spirit witness and ask for friends or family to come and safely take them home. Sometimes people feel more comfortable getting a professional to come and support them in that process. And people like myself are around in the community.
Of course.
Word of mouth or other ways to find us.
Right. You know what's come to mind in the course of our conversation is that I've heard of people, say for example a couple, who find that whenever they fight, the fights always happen in one particular room. That there's one space where all of their heated arguments tend to happen. Have you ever encountered something like that?
Yes, quite commonly. And it may get started off perhaps because of an original experience that locks a pattern of alarm or fear or frustration as a place memory there that then triggers people. Sometimes there might be a dragon line or chi path that's gone sour that passes through that makes people feel uncomfortable and unpleasant when they're standing on that location. Sometimes there's a mischievous spirit who just wants to make people agitated and grumpy because that's all they've got for recreation and it's a kind of a long day. So it can be a mix of things, but often people twig that there's a problem because, as you say, it's just that one spot, or we always have our arguments here, or whoever's in that location tends to get defensive or
and you found that once that energy is cleared, then the pattern in this couple or whatever in the household does change?
Yes, and blue sky perfect scenario is that everything comes free and clear and the place feels welcoming and holding and safe and supportive. Often there's a bit of a sliding scale. Some places are easy to bring to that state. Some places have more layers of history or more entrenched or embedded history, and will take a longer period of time to fully come right. Some places, just by their basic nature, aren't really places where people will thrive. But so there's a bit of a bell curve. But we can generally resolve completely 80 to 85% of concerns like this, and then help significantly with most of the rest.
Do you have, I'm all of a sudden curious about what you probably have as a huge archive of stories. I'm sure you have phenomenal stories. So can you tell us, can you share with us one story?
A very favorite story of mine was the ghost of, I think must have been a Georgian housekeeper or housemaid who clearly was still in the house and clearly still in service. And on one occasion, when the gentleman of the house was changing a plug, put a screwdriver down next to him and couldn't find it when he looked for it again, but found it put away in its correct drawer in the basement when he went down there. On another occasion, the lady of the house lost an earring when she was kissing a guest goodbye and heard it fall into the gravel at the steps in the door, gave it up for lost and put the remaining earring on her bedside table that night, and when she woke up in the morning found that the missing one had been put next to it as
very
a pair.
helpful ghost.
And then finally the husband and wife had a habit of whoever was upstairs first after 6 in the evening would close the shutters and put the heat on in the bedroom so it'd be cozy when they finally went to bed. And one evening they were both busy and neither of them went upstairs until it was bedtime, and they discovered that the ghost had close the
Close the
shutters and switch on the heater and turn the bed back down for them. So they weren't concerned about this ghost, but we decided that it would be kind
The
to
compassionate thing to do.
release her from service, even though she was being helpful.
Very helpful.
So sometimes we encounter ghosts with fear and alarm, but they're just people like us,
Yeah.
and often they're trying to be helpful.
Yeah. So, is there anything else? We have about 2 minutes. So
Yeah.
I want to show viewers your website so that if they're feeling they need some assistance with their, and there it is, patrickmcmanaway.com, and you can see on Patrick's website there a list of incredible services and workshops that you offer. People can even come to your workshops in England next year. or
Workshops all over the
some
world.
all over the world. But definitely in terms of contacting you, if there are some specific concerns that they have with their space and feeling agitated, anxious, like people are watching them, or having some sort of space where always the arguments happen. Anything else that you would like to share with people in the last minute or so?
I think that we've all got the natural sensory perceptions to read our psychic environment, although perhaps we haven't been encouraged and supported in doing that. But I think the most important thing is just to trust your intuition and trust what comes into your imagination. The imagination is a sensory faculty as well as a creative faculty. And so if you have a sense of that there's something there, then I would trust that that's the case. And if you have a sense that it needs a bit of love, then project a bit of love in that direction, and see if there's communication that's purposeful that arises.
Well, and just knowing what you do, and the fact that you offer consulting and counseling, some sort of coaching even for individual purposes, is that I would want to say to our viewers, if you're feeling any sort of unsettled feeling at home, or that sensation that you're just never at ease, or just have this sense of discomfort in your environment, work or home or wherever, that just having you for a consultation could be really helpful, just to see what's up. It would be a very helpful way to figure out if there's anything that they can clear out with your assistance.
Lovely.
Thank you so much, Patrick. This was a really interesting conversation. And thank you for joining us. We have one more show for the end of the year, and I hope you'll join us again. Take care.